Hello there, I'm Guildmaster Dan, and welcome to the Fourth Wall. Now, today we have a lot to talk about, so we're going to go ahead and skip any starting joke, because today we're going to be talking about races! More specifically, we're going to be talking about constructing the racial background of your campaign setting. Races! When it comes to picking out and constructing your races for your campaign setting, there are a few questions that you need to ask yourself. The first of which is, do you even need races? And keep in mind that there's lots of fantastical settings that have just humans. Heck, the whole concept of races just comes from our own world where, we have multiple ethnicities, cultures, and creeds. And, a lot of people feel that those fantasy races just are exemplifications of certain cultures or even just personality types. Well, consider your theme. Are races necessary for you to make your world feel diverse? Are they even appropriate to the type of world that you're building? If you need examples, look to Frank Herbert's Dune if you're doing sci-fi, or Glenn Cook's Black Company series if you're doing fantasy, or even, Martin's A Song of Fire and Ice, Game of Thrones. There's another example of a fantasy setting without, non-human races, or at least for the majority of it. You just want to consider your theme and kind of keep in mind, remember the reasons why players pick non-human races to begin with. Other than just flat out being presented the option, there are a few reasons why they pick those. First of which, they may identify with that certain race or that certain archetypical personality type. That might be why they gravitate towards being a dwarf or being an elf. Some players will do it just to munchkin, just for the stat bonuses to build their character. Some just do it for the novelty, just for the sake of, oh, I've never played that before, or, oh man, that's a cool race, I want to play that. Actually, you'll probably find that one the most. And then some play them for the challenge. They may read about the culture of a race or, of a physiology behind playing a non-humanoid race, and, may want to, tackle the challenge of role-playing that character. Well, keep those in mind and consider your setting. Do you actually need to have non-human races? If you decide that you want to have non-human races in your campaign, that's fine. That means the second question that you need to ask yourself is, should you invent or borrow races? That means, borrowing races either from mythology or other continuities, or just flat out inventing new races. Where you need to choose between the two is you want to consider your audience. Are you building a campaign, just for your personal play group, a personal world that you're just going to run your groups through? Or are you building a campaign setting that, you want to develop into a supplement and put out there on maybe RPG Now to start selling? That's kind of important. Now, if it's a personal setting, there's nothing wrong with borrowing races whatsoever. In fact, you could go crazy with it. Heck, a real easy way for you to come up with races in your personal campaign setting is just pick your favorites from all different continuities that you like. You can build a world where you have humans, Vulcans, Skeksis, and Krogan, and those are your 4 races. Done. You already have cultures to build off of now. You just need to fantasy them or sci-fi them, depending. But it could be as simple as that, just picking your favorite races to fill in. Or maybe you want to have some traditional fantasy races, such as elves and dwarves, as pulled from Norse mythology, and fill out the rest of it with maybe Zora or Gorons from Legend of Zelda. There's nothing wrong with borrowing for your personal setting. Another form of borrowing is borrowing from myth. Like I just mentioned, dwarves and elves and giants, those come from Norse mythology. That was not invented by, Tolkien. Those were all in Norse mythology, as you may have seen in Thor. Those concepts were there before, and he borrowed them for his setting, as did a lot of fantasy writers in the past. Well, you can borrow from other mythologies besides just Norse. I mean, you could use the traditional Norse races, or you can use satyrs and Naga and centaurs and the Sumerian scorpion men. The only thing I would recommend is, don't be afraid to branch out beyond like the big four that seem to be the big four cultures that seem to get used a lot. Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Asian mythology, and Egyptian mythology. Also a lot of European folklore as well. But don't get stuck in those. Don't be afraid to explore, Mesoamerican, Indian, African, and Oceanic cultures because they have rich mythological backgrounds that have very cool ideas that you can use. Don't be afraid to explore those as well. Now, if you are building something more in line for the commercial half of it, if you're developing, say, a supplement that you want to put onto RPG now, you probably only want to borrow from mythology or at least common law public domain sources. Otherwise, you want to invent your races. Or there is another option for you. If you really want to have, a type of race, like something, say, Mind Flayers. You can't put Mind Flayers in your game and call them Mind Flayers or Illithids, because those are trademark names by Wizards of the Coast. But you really like that general idea. Well, you can use proxy races. And by proxy, I mean you can invent a race that is similar to the Mind Flayer or the Illithid, or to elves, or to insert, desired race here. You can build a proxy that is similar, but is different. Now, when you do that, keep in mind that some people really hate that. There are players out there that see that and like, oh, come on. But, at the same time, you have to keep legal concerns in. You don't want yourself to be, get your cease and desist from Wizards of the Coast or, whatever company. And you don't want to be accused of just cheating. So using a proxy race can work, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you do decide to go that route, I highly recommend trying to do something a little different with that proxy race. If you want to make a proxy Illithid race, that's fine, but, I don't know, maybe base them off of something other than octopuses. Personally, I think that's the best part of them. But maybe base them off of, I don't know, lungfish or something. But try and do something a little different with them. Maybe change around their culture a little, change around their physiology a little. Do something new with them. Don't just carbon copy them because the companies you're trying to not get in trouble with will see through that just as much as every player out there. But if you don't want to borrow races, or at least you don't want to borrow any more races and you'd like to fill in some other race spots with ones that you've invented, there's some thoughts to be had. Primarily, thoughts of your theme. Yes, you want to go back and look at your theme when it comes to inventing races because you have a lot of ideas already built there. The preconceptions you have about how your world works can generate your ideas for what sort of races to have. Take a look back at my previous world building episode where we discussed theming your world to see an example of how that can come out. You should also only use as many races as you need. Even though having a lot of choices can be nice, it can also distract from your player and can be inappropriate to your theme. If you're running a world or building a world similar to Westeros, it will feel out of place if you have 12 different races, non-human races, walking around your proxy King's Landing. You can make it work, but there's a point where, there's a point where all those races start to feel samey because the ideas are spread thin. Pretty much, you only want to build as many races as are going to feel distinct. There will be a certain point that you'll reach where all the new races are really just a flavor of the month that you're throwing in there. So, focus your creativity here. Only build races that are needed for your setting. Ones that feel unique and feel distinct from the other races and really have a stake in the world. Don't just make races for the sake of having a bunch of racism. Now, when it actually comes to building their cultures and everything, I generally have a rule of thumb where if you're building a humanoid race, do their culture first. Come up with their, what sort of culture they have, and then worry about the physiology later. Because in truth, a demi-human with big horns and a demi-human with long ears are functionally the same. You can plug them into any culture that you come up with because they're essentially proxy human races. They're proxy for different types of humans, so you can use them however you like. Come up with your culture first. Now, when you're making non-humanoid races, that's when it gets interesting. That's where you want to focus on your physiology first and really figure out how their bodies work, just because their culture will be shaped by how they function. Just by evolving differently from humans, they're going to value different things. So build their physiology first and figure out how that would affect or what sort of cultures would grow from those types of creatures. Lastly, you need to consider about the races that you're constructing or borrowing. Is it a playable race or is it a non-playable race? Because not all races are necessarily playable. Take a look at orcs in Dungeons & Dragons. Those are not traditionally a playable race. In fact, if you want to play those, you have to get a supplement in order to play them. They are not one of the core playable races because they're mostly evil and barbaric and kind of hard to be a hero with. My general rule of thumb is look at the race that you've constructed. And if that race can produce many heroes, then it's a playable race. Essentially, if it can produce enough of good-hearted people to go out, adventure, and become heroes, do right, or do the things in your game that they are meant to do, then they're playable. If heroes or adventurers or investigators can only be produced as an exception, then that's probably not a good playable race. That should probably be a non-playable race. Only there for background and for combat. Now, players will always want to be an exception. There will always be players that, oh man, that villain race sounds cool. I want to be one of them. I could be the misunderstood rebel that was thrown out of society for being too kind to people. Your Drizzt Do'Urdens of the world. You're going to have players that want to be that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you should keep that separate from when you're designing your world. Because those sort of exceptions are between a GM and a player, not between a designer and a player. You are designing a world, and the playable races are going to be the ones that can actually produce a whole bunch of heroes. It may be over years, but we'll be able to produce many heroes, not an occasional exception, not a lone exception that happens once in a millennium. Leave that to the GM and the player. Leave those sort of exceptions out of your design decisions. Now, there are a lot of things to consider when you're picking your races and constructing individual races, and I could not possibly have touched on them all. And certainly, I may return to this topic and go more in depth into actually constructing an invented race. But in the meantime, if there's something that you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up, or if you disagreed with something I had to say, please feel free to leave a comment below. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Do you want to kill the Batman? It doesn't have to be the Batman, but let's go kill the Batman. See, it sounds way creepier if I do this.
Do you want to kill the Batman? It doesn't have to be the Batman.